On this Tuesday night, frayed nerves over raging wildfires.
Just constantly scared, really.
The new local states of emergency and evacuation orders. A notorious murderer's secret prison transfer. Why the Correctional Service didn't want Canadians to know about Luka Magnotta's move to medium security. A Global News investigation. A trade war charges up over the electric vehicle industry. The potential impact on Canada. And remembering the master of the short story.
I knew I had to do something about what I found in life around me.
Canadian Alice Monroe's journey to Nobel-winning author.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. The massive fire that forced almost 5,000 people from a northern BC town exploded in size overnight. But what a difference a day can make. Despite the Parker Lake wildfire burning on the doorstep of Fort Nelson, rain is providing a moment of reprieve. There's hope favorable weather conditions like a change in wind direction will keep the fire at bay.
When I can see that flag blow in that direction, that's the direction that, honestly, we really want that fire, at least the Parker Lake fire, to move. Now, definitely not a downpour, but a steady little sprinkle right now.
Another wildfire in BC's north forced the evacuation of an entire First Nation today, showing just how quickly things can change. And tonight, hundreds of people in Fort McMurray, Alberta, are being ordered out as a wildfire moves closer. Neetu Garcha reports on the early start to the fire season.
A rapidly growing blaze threatening the Fort Nelson, BC region has so far stayed away from the outskirts of the town and the neighboring First Nation. The regional mayor says weather conditions have improved.
Actually, tiny bit of rain. About 50 people who have chosen to stay and look after their own properties. We're not out of the woods yet.
Just constantly scared.
Evacuees like Erica Biddlecombe are in an anxious waiting game in long lineups at a reception centre in Fort St. John, BC, Tuesday to renew evacuee services like accommodations.
You're just on edge all the time because you're just waiting and waiting and waiting.
Biddlecombe was pet sitting for a family who was traveling overseas when the evacuations came down on Friday. She quickly packed up what she could and left the community in an RV with her parents.
Between the three of us, there was 9 dogs and 2 cats between 3 campers.
Another wildfire north of Fort St. John also prompting evacuations in Doig River First Nation.
There was a grass fire earlier and it just totally escalated. It started the night before and then the winds picked up and it just got out of control.
We will continue to look to our federal partners as well to provide us with the support that we need to battle these fires. The drought is remarkable. The risk is very real.
In Alberta, the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo has declared a state of local emergency.
The wind is pushing it towards the town of Fort McMurray. We're seeing extreme fire behavior. Firefighters have been pulled from the fire line for safety reasons.
Rain could help crews contain a wildfire about 16 kilometers southeast of Fort McMurray as an out-of-control wildfire in the Grand Prairie area has grown to more than 1,300 hectares.
So has that moved since the weekend? It's on the south side? Yeah, it hasn't moved.
In northwest Manitoba, the Premier taking a tour of an area hit by a large lightning-caused wildfire. Driven by winds and dry conditions, it forced hundreds to leave Cranberry Portage over the weekend.
Very intense fire behavior.
As the country's wildfire season is off to a troubling pace. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Now to a Global News exclusive and the controversial transfer of murderer Luka Magnotta to a medium security prison. Tonight, we're learning Correctional Service Canada instructed staff to keep quiet over the transfer 2 years ago. The organization says it's policy not to announce prison transfers. Touria Izri joins us now with more details. Touria?
Carolyn, Luka Magnotta is one of Canada's most notorious murderers. Magnotta was transferred from a maximum to medium security prison on August 11th, 2022. 3 days earlier, Correctional Service Canada instructed staff not to inform the public about the move. And as a result, the transfer did not come to light for nearly 2 years. A Correctional Service Canada staff member sent an email on August 8, 2022 with talking points. We do not announce transfers as we don't disclose the location of offenders. If asked, we would advise media that the Privacy Act does not allow us to speak about specific offenders' cases. Magnotta is serving an indeterminate life sentence for murdering and dismembering international student June Lin in 2012. Magnotta was moved to La Macaza, northwest of Montreal. The same medium security prison serial killer Paul Bernardo was also transferred to. In both cases, government officials said privacy laws prevented them from releasing information.
We're talking about prisoners who have committed horrendous crimes, but their rights are protected like any other citizen.
Canada's former correctional investigator says there's room for more transparency.
Explain the law. Explain why the law is the way it is. Explain what those principles are based on.
The Correctional Service said in a statement to Global News it takes privacy concerns very seriously and that the system is based on rehabilitation, even for offenders who remain incarcerated for the rest of their lives. Carolyn?
Touria Izri in Ottawa, thank you. Saskatchewan RCMP say they have laid 60 charges against a 47-year-old man in relation to an historic child sexual assault investigation. Richard Dyke was an Air Cadet instructor and operated a home-based daycare. And a warning, some of the details are disturbing.
The magnitude of this investigation has proven significant. Investigators have analyzed over 1.5 million pieces of digital evidence. They were obtained from 24 terabytes of seized electronic devices.
The charges against Dyke date back to 2005 and are alleged to have continued until 2020. He was arrested in November following a report of alleged historical sexual assault against 3 boys under the age of 12. Since then, RCMP have identified an additional 29 victims, all youths, with the youngest being just 18 months old. Dyke faces charges of sexual assault, voyeurism, and multiple counts of making child pornography. Ontario has announced strict new penalties in an effort to combat auto theft. Doug Ford's Conservative government announced the new legislation today, which would suspend or even permanently revoke the driver's license of violent auto thieves.
This includes a lifetime license suspension for convicted auto thieves from ever driving again upon a 3rd conviction, with 10 to 15-year suspensions for first and second convictions after serving sentences under the Criminal Code.
The legislation will be tabled Thursday and is expected to pass easily given the Progressive Conservatives' majority in Ontario's legislature. Home to just under 20,000 people, Port Colborne, Ontario is set to become a key part of Canada's multi-billion-dollar electric vehicle supply chain. As part of Honda Canada's plan to build EVs in the province, the community on Lake Erie has been chosen as the future site of a first-of-its-kind lithium-ion separator plant. The news is being celebrated by the industry, but as Mike Drolet reports, the announcement comes in the shadow of what many fear is an escalating and volatile trade war.
Another week, yet another auto investment announcement in Ontario.
Thank you, Minister Champagne.
There have been so many, politicians have begun recycling their jokes.
How many times have we said game changer now, week after week, month after month?
The $1.6 billion Azaï-Cassé-owned plant will produce components for Honda's Alliston battery plant, which we've known for weeks. What's new is the location. Port Colborne, Ontario, a town of 18,000 on the north shore of Lake Erie that hadn't seen an investment this large since the International Nickel Company opened a plant in 1914.
This is on that scale, actually quite larger than that scale.
The announcement comes on the same day U.S. President Joe Biden announced heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, as well as batteries and the critical minerals that go in them, in an attempt to prevent less expensive Chinese cars from flooding the market.
Obviously, we're watching closely what our closest trading partner in the United States is doing.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sidestepped several questions on the subject, but industry watchers expect Canada to follow suit.
Canada cannot afford to be known in Washington as the open side door for the Chinese.
The danger here is that a trade war could potentially lead to geopolitical supply chain issues. Last fall, for example, China declared that some graphite exports would require government approval. Will they now do the same with other critical minerals?
Right now, if you want lithium, if you need graphite, if you need cobalt and manganese, you're going to get it from Chinese sources.
It takes at least a decade for a mine to begin extracting materials like lithium from the ground. Until then, the 4 new EV plants being built in Ontario and Quebec, along with the supply plant announced today, will have to import everything they need, while a trade war revs up. Mike Drolet, Global News, Port Colborne, Ontario.
A massive billboard collapsed during a rainstorm in India, killing at least 14 people and injuring dozens of others. The 30-meter-tall sign crashed through the roof of a Mumbai gas station yesterday, where more than 100 people were sheltering from the storm. There are reports the billboard may have been installed illegally. The Deputy Chief Minister of the region has ordered an inquiry. Testimony from Donald Trump's former lawyer coming up. What he was constantly urged not to do. In Baltimore, investigators looking into the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge say the cargo ship lost power hours before leaving port. According to a preliminary report, the cargo vessel experienced a blackout while undergoing maintenance about 10 hours before it left the port. A crew member mistakenly closed an exhaust damper. The report also says the ship lost power 2 more times as it approached the bridge. 6 construction workers were killed. In New York, Donald Trump's lawyers have begun their cross-examination of star witness Michael Cohen. Trump's former attorney and fixer placed the ex-president at the center of an alleged hush money scheme aimed at buying and suppressing negative stories ahead of the 2016 election. As Jackson Prosco reports, the case could soon be turned over to the jury.
Why do they call you fiction? Back on the stand, Michael Cohen testified about how and why payments were made to adult film star Stormy Daniels, recounting a 2017 meeting inside the Oval Office with then-President Trump, where he says he discussed his reimbursement for the payment he made to Daniels. Cohen testified he created bogus monthly invoices and received 11 checks totaling $420,000 from Trump. After Cohen became the target of an FBI raid in 2018, he testified Trump reassured him. He said to me, "Don't worry, I'm the president of the United States. There's nothing here. Everything's going to be okay. Stay tough. You're going to be okay."
So I just heard that they broke into the office of one of my personal attorneys.
He said he felt he had a secret back channel to the president through a lawyer and was regularly urged not to flip on his former boss. In linchpin testimony key to the allegations of election interference, Cohen was asked why he paid the $130,000 to Daniels in the first place. Cohen said, to ensure that the story would not come out, would not affect Mr. Trump's chances of becoming president of the United States. Asked to confirm on whose direction and behalf he made the payment, Cohen said, on behalf of Mr. Trump. Under cross-examination, Trump's defense sought to shred Cohen's credibility, painting him as disgruntled and money-hungry. They questioned him about his frequent scathing remarks about Trump on social media. Cohen testified about his past, confirming he was once knee-deep into the cult of Trump, but changed his views by 2019. He also confirmed prosecutors have repeatedly asked him to stop talking about the case in public. Cohen is expected to be the prosecution's final witness, and it's not clear if Trump's defense will call anyone to the stand, meaning that this case could be in the hands of the jury as early as next week. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Fredo Canada is recalling 2 popular snacks due to risk of salmonella contamination. Harvest cheddar-flavored Sun Chips and Munchies Original Snack Mix are affected. A seasoning supplier notified Fredo Canada that an ingredient provided to it by a third party was potentially contaminated with salmonella. Recalled products with a guaranteed fresh date of July 16 through August 13 should be thrown out. Outrage in Georgia ahead. The controversial bill sparking protests across the country. The United Nations has identified a staff member killed in Gaza yesterday as an Indian national. The UN says the worker was traveling in a clearly marked vehicle to a hospital near Rafah when it was struck. Another UN staff member was injured. The Israeli military says the incident is under review, adding that an initial investigation showed the vehicle was hit in what it considers an active combat zone. The IDF, meanwhile, has confirmed it was responsible for a deadly strike on a school run by the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel claims the school was being used as a war room by Hamas commanders. It alleges 15 militants were killed in the strike. An Al Jazeera report says at least 20 people were killed. Neither claim could be independently verified. Thousands of protesters are still on the streets of Georgia tonight after the country's parliament passed a hugely controversial law that's being dubbed the Foreign Agents Bill. Demonstrators say it's inspired by similar repressive legislation in Russia, which requires organizations that receive funding from abroad to register as agents of foreign influence. The former Soviet republic sits on the Black Sea at the edge of Europe and is bordered by Russia. As Redmond Shannon reports, after Belarus and Ukraine, this is yet another Eastern European country that appears to be torn between Moscow and the EU.
Chaos and violence outside Georgia's barricaded parliament, with similar scenes inside too. On a day many in the country fear Georgia is pivoting away from democracy and toward Russia.
We will always fight for our freedom. They will never win. Russia will never take what they want to take away from us, Ukraine or any other country.
Lawmakers eventually passed the so-called Foreign Agent Bill on Tuesday. It would require any organisation that gets more than a fifth of its revenue from abroad to register as bearing the interests of a foreign power. Groups would then be subject to government monitoring. Russia passed a similar law 12 years ago.
And we saw, as a matter of fact, what was the effects of that Russian law back in Russia. It basically curbed all the civil society and free media in the country.
The bill doesn't target Western influence specifically, but crucially, the European Union says the law would harm Georgia's application for membership, something most Georgians aspire to.
It breaches the conditions put for human rights, civil society, free media, and of course political polarization.
Georgia's Prime Minister says the law is about transparency. He and the Kremlin deny accusations of Moscow influence. But the oligarch founder of the governing Georgian Dream Party made his fortune in post-Soviet Russia and has criticized Western influence. Washington has threatened sanctions over the police crackdown against protesters.
We're deeply troubled by Georgia's Kremlin-style foreign agents legislation.
With elections due in October, protesters fear the unpopular government will use the new law to crack down on opposition voices between now and then. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
A literary icon. Next, how Alice Monroe mastered the art of the short story. Canadian literary powerhouse Alice Monroe has died at the age of 92. Monroe's short stories earned her an international fan base and a Nobel Prize. She passed away Monday night at her care home in Port Hope, Ontario. Eric Sorensen reports on her life and remarkable achievements.
In Alice Monroe's hometown of Wingham, Ontario, at the garden in her name, there's a sculpture, a child with a book. Like Alice herself reading The Little Mermaid that first inspired her to think up her own story with a happier ending than a mermaid who lost the prince.
I walked round and round outside the house, making up a happy ending for The Little Mermaid. She got the prince.
And so began a life of making up stories.
I knew I had to do something about what I found in life around me.
The life around her was rural southwestern Ontario. But the stories and the characters were recognizable to anyone. A career in writing did not happen overnight. Alice moved to Vancouver with her first husband, James Monroe, and later they opened a bookstore in Victoria. Her passion, however, was not selling stories, but telling them.
One time she, working in the store, and she said, "I can write better than these people." And so from then on, she quit the store and stayed home and wrote.
She would return to Huron County, Ontario, the bucolic setting for so many of her fictionalized tales.
I thought that Stories are so important in the world, and I want to make up some of these stories, and I want to keep on doing this.
Raising 3 children, Monroe didn't have time for anything longer than short stories. Yet for so many readers, they were the perfect length, fleeting, neatly written, and easily read.
He thought maybe she was joking when she proposed to him on a cold, bright day on the beach at Port Stanley.
So it looks very simple. It looks so easy, but it's what comes up underneath and that you feel as a reader. And that's the sign of the genius.
Monroe thought someday she would graduate to full-length novels, but her niche, her gift, was the short story.
You're a great short story writer. If you want to go on writing short stories for the rest of your life, I'll go on publishing them.
Alice Monroe is the winner of the 1998 Giller Prize.
Monroe was acclaimed and beloved, producing 14 collections that can be found in at least 12 languages.
This is a wonderful moment for me.
She won 3 awards from the Governor General, 2 Gillers, 1 Booker, and finally the Nobel Prize.
The Canadian author Alice Monroe, master of the contemporary short story.
At the time, just the 13th woman in 112 years to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, a small-town Ontario girl who had stories to tell.
I want my stories to move people, that causes people to feel some kind of reward from the writing.
And what reward awaited readers from that proposal on a cold, bright day on the beach at Port Stanley?
Do you think it would be fun if we got married? He took her up on it. He shouted yes. He never wanted to be far away from her. She had the spark of life.
That was in all of Alice Monroe's characters, the spark of life, from the modern master of the short story.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is the shipwreck of SS Charcot in Conception Harbour, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.